if we were going to do a live stream that began at 5:45 a.m., we were going to get a game that went the distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No rest for the weary.
Karma, baby.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals, moving on in the Knockouts edition. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Who survived the quarterfinals yesterday?
Who?
Yeah, I put it to our audience because I barely made it through.
Yeah, some endurance required, some miserable matches that were predictable. I'm looking at you, Canada, Germany.
Because of stoppage time, because of extra time, because of stoppage time in extra time, and because of the penalty shootout, Spain-Colombia finished 3 hours and 5 minutes after kickoff.
You know what they need? A pitch clock.
I was going to say, what is this, Major League Baseball?
Yeah.
Speed it up here. Get Rob Manfred on the case.
Yeah, because that guy's great at handling things.
But our day started very early at 5:45 a.m. Pacific to bring our paid Patreon members our live watch along on YouTube for USA Japan, which did go 120 minutes and is just a fascinating game, but an absolute misery to sit through.
Intermittently interesting, surrounded by a fair amount of misery, is a fair way to describe that game. And as is so often the case with games like this, it is one moment of individual brilliance that yells from the mountaintops against the desolate landscape. And that is sort of what Trinity Rodman's goal felt like.
Yeah.
When it happened.
It certainly seemed to have felt like that to her, too, based on her reaction.
And rightfully so.
Yeah.
I was reminded I've watched a lot of soccer in my life, and I was reminded kind of the Mario Götze goal in the 2014 Men's World Cup final that comes in the 114th minute. That was against a game that had, again, moments of opportunity. Also, that Spain 2010 World Cup final against the Dutch, which was truly a miserable watch. And then, again, an Iniesta goal separates it in injury time or in extra time.
I'll actually throw you the 1999 World Cup final between the U.S. and China. People remember Brianna Scurry's penalty saves. People remember the Brandi Chastain winner. What they don't remember is that it was early July at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena in the middle of the afternoon with no cover, and that game went 120 minutes as well, and finished 0-0. It was horrendous.
Yeah, again, like I separate that game out because it was yet worse in the sense that there was there wasn't a moment that it had to go to penalties, that there wasn't a goal to separate it. I think of yesterday's Germany-Canada game as a bit more like the 99 final.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
But let's talk about how we get to the Rodman goal, which I felt was not necessarily a straight and narrow path, but one that I think the U.S. can feel largely pretty good about as far as game execution is concerned. And that the Japanese, before the goal, could feel quite good about.
I think that's true. Kelly O'Hara and Lisa Leslie have an Olympics podcast, which is
love that.
What a beautiful sentence to be able to utter. But Kelly O'Hara said at one point, we were able to beat a low block, which has been our bugaboo. And I don't think this is the game that proves that, Kelly. Maybe the game against Australia would be better evidence for your argument, because Rodman's goal is a bit of a miracle and is all finishing luck, quite frankly. But before that, I think you are right. The people who are negative about the U.S.'s performance here, I think, are coming at it from a belief that somehow this is the true talent of the team, that somehow the midfield had passing lanes to get to the forwards and just refused to take them. Whereas I think that this game actually says a lot more about how Japan defended the U.S. than how the U.S. attacked Japan. LaChina Robinson, going along the women's basketball thread, who's been doing color commentary for the women's basketball tournament at the Olympics, she tweeted, "I know nothing about soccer. Please explain this game to me in basketball terms." And I saw two responses that I think basically said the same thing, but from two different points of view. And those points of view I think are actually really important. So one tweet said, Aja Wilson and Brianna Stewart have scoring lanes, but Kelsey Plum and Chelsea Gray are just passing it back and forth to each other in the half court. All right. The other one said, Aja Wilson and Brianna Stewart are desperately trying to find spots to receive, but the opposition is throwing up one of the best low post zone defenses the U.S. has ever seen, and the wings just can't feed the post players. And in fact, we talked a little bit about it on the YouTube broadcast in those terms, that the U.S., for all of their striving, really did not have a lot of room to move because of Japan's defensive organization. Now, did the U.S. play like shit? Yeah, they played like shit. This was not their best game. This was suffer ball versus struggle ball. The U.S. posted 0.7 XG the entire match. Mm-hmm. You know, this was not fun, and I don't think anybody would argue that they played well. But relative to both the game state and the tournament state and what they were up against, I think the U.S. has to be pretty satisfied being the unstoppable force facing the immovable object. The immovable object often cannot be moved.
It's funny. I agree with the second interpretation, and I do think that this is where basketball and soccer diverge. Basketball, a very fundamentally high-scoring sport that ebbs and flows. Soccer, a sport where the same sort of on-field fluidity can exist, but where a defense can stifle the entire way, and where it is where an applicable strategy is something along the lines of, we're just going to try to prevent you from ever scoring at the cost of us really limiting our attacking opportunities. And I felt like Japan, that was what they set out to do. They set out in what is a 3-4-3 that turned out to look a lot more like a coherent back five for long stretches of the game, which we anticipated. And that just denied space and denied space and denied space and denied space. I think this is where soccer looks a lot more like hockey, and this is just like a limited shooting windows, bad opportunity after bad opportunity, 0-0 hockey game that drags into overtime and then drags into, frankly, a second overtime. But unlike in hockey, isn't ended on a golden goal or a sudden death winner. Though, if there were a golden goal, we would have all been spared an additional 15 minutes and left on a real high. That said, I felt like I'll push back a little bit on the idea that this wasn't a great performance from the U.S. in that the Japanese deserve a lot of credit for how little they afforded the U.S. It was not that the U.S. weren't trying multiple varieties of attack. We saw long balls over the top. We saw diagonals. We saw dribbly attempts. We saw interplay outside the edge of the box, and we saw the occasional long shot. The U.S. was trying to find multiple avenues to score. It is full points to the Japanese for having such a well-drilled and coherent defensive plan that for the first 105 minutes of this game, every single one of those avenues resulted in a chance that was less than one would have hoped for.
I think there are two other points that really require the context of the state of the tournament to understand why the U.S. shouldn't beat themselves up too badly about how they did against Japan. One is Randy Waldrum, who's the head coach of Nigeria, tweeted in the middle of the quarterfinal pageantry yesterday. He's like, every player out there looks gassed. Every single player looks exhausted. This is not a functional way to run a tournament. And I thought about it, and my instinct was to maybe say, well, hang on, is that just how we feel because this is what we're looking at right now, or has this always historically been a problem at the Olympics? Incidentally, at the 2012 Olympics in London, not a single quarterfinal match went to extra time. Every single one finished 90. And it's the same structure, 2 days off, that same every 72 hours cadence of games. What I think, my theory of that backs up what both Waldron has said and what a lot of people have said just about the grind of the modern Olympics is that back in 2012, most players were not playing full club seasons.
Yep.
And those who were doing so in a very, very different, worse, frankly, context in Europe. And thanks to the NWSL adding domestic cups to the fixture schedule, to the Champions Leagues expanding to full group stage, to the Euros becoming more and more significant, if we want to talk about the international summer cadence on European players' legs, there are just more games that all these players are playing. So when you suddenly get to a tournament like this where we're trying to pack in 6 games in 17 days, I think the potential for players in 2024 to break down at the quarterfinal level relative to players in 2012 might be real. It might be significantly higher. The other thing along the fatigue line is Jeff Kassouf at ESPN mentioned that, and I actually want to get your thoughts on this, that if the U.S. had decided to be even more direct, to try and, activate the dribblers in transition, get balls over the top more quickly and get in behind the defensive line. If they had tried to do that as sort of plan A and make that the central element of how they attack Japan, the fatigue might have actually risked not necessarily connecting more passes and getting off better shots, but also exposing them in areas where Japan could unleash counterattacks.
Yeah.
And that is really, really significant, that Emma Hayes, not only in wanting to try and develop a more controlled, possession-oriented game to stop top-level sides, especially top-level sides who like to counter and play in transition, but also recognizing that she's made this gamble that she needs to keep the starting 11 as together as possible because they haven't played together very much, and she's really focused on cohesion. But that also means everybody's going to be pretty wiped. And so how do you manage that in the moment? Maybe what we saw yesterday, especially against the best low block that the U.S. has faced under Hayes, this is the result. And it's not necessarily a strike on Hayes or a strike on the players. It's just making the best with what you got, given the circumstances.
I think that's a really savvy point from Jeff.
Yeah.
And deserves full credit. And I'll break it down like this. Which would you rather do for 120 minutes? Dead sprints and then dead sprints back when they don't work, followed by very low interval rest, or consistent jogging and with the intermittent sprint, consistent movement, paced movement. And I think when it's thought about in those terms, you begin to understand why more direct play from the U.S. would have had diminishing returns, particularly in the forward line, where, frankly, you and I were both calling for Trinity Rodman to be taken off because she looked so gassed. And I actually stand by that. Her goal is a byproduct of that little extra in the tank that one draws deep and finds. And then, as you've stated, finishing luck, I think pretty extraordinary technique behind the luck. But if that ball goes flying 10 yards over the goal too, not a ton of difference there.
Yeah, and credit to Rodman as well for taking that extra touch to deke her mark and create the window where she could even get the shot off.
Correct.
But at the same time, it's a tough chance, it's a tough angle, and you're right, it's all that little bit of magic that isn't necessarily repeatable, but the team is very happy to have it. We talked about in the preview, like the way that Japan was going to line up those center backs against those forwards was going to be the story of the game. 3v3, and would the U.S.'s movement be able to pull them out of position and create space? They didn't.
No.
That's how good Moika Minami, Saki Kumagai, and Toko Koga, again, all of 18 years old, with a marking assignment of Mallory Swanson, no less, was incredibly, incredibly impressive. And not many center back units can do that to that kind of a forward line. And if this game happens on a World Cup cadence where you're getting a lot of extra rest, not only between group stage games, but between the group stage and the first knockout round, maybe the US's tactical approach is very different because there will just be a little bit more freshness in the legs. As it stood, I mean, Japan just pulled off their plan to perfection.
Yeah. And we say all this knowing that Japan lost, acknowledging that Japan executed its game plan better, and still that wasn't enough.
That's right.
If you'd asked the managers at halftime who felt better about where they were in the game, almost certainly it would have been Japan. Same at the end of regulation. And only because of the goal, a goal that I don't want to diminish Trinity Rodman's technique or ability, a shot she almost certainly practices a lot, cutting in on your inside foot on her left foot at this time and firing across the goal. Like, this is not it was a patterned move that she has executed before. It just happened to come off. Everything else about what the Japanese did, and is the problem with the game plan that they set out to play, which is as you invite so much pressure onto the ball, you open yourselves up to wonder goals also happening like that. It's so hard to sustain that for the entire run of the game. And then you're just giving yourself a coin flip to get to penalties. Again, why I've called Japan like a high floor, low ceiling team is like we saw the limitations of their masterful tactical plan laid bare with just a bit of bad fortune. But even if it had worked out even if it had gone the whole distance and neither team had scored, we're just at a coin flip when it comes to penalties. And like, I don't love a coin flip to win a game.
And look at the other side of this coin here. The U.S. didn't generate a lot of attack, but neither did Japan. And that was very deliberate. That was not an accident. Like, Emma Hayes is incredibly aware of the ways that Japan can play in transition if they have space and can move the ball quickly upfield. They didn't have those chances.
No.
Ever. Like, I tweeted yesterday a photo of Naomi Girma's heat map. And she is essentially covering what is an unfathomable amount of ground for a single player, particularly for a center back.
Yeah.
And people recognize what that means because I think it's gotten like 1,000 likes or some nonsense. Like, she is an extraordinary individual, and her insane passing data is predominantly coming from side to side and backwards passing, and it's not a lot of vertical movement. It didn't matter because Japan never could get out of second gear once they had the ball.
Yeah, that's just correct. The US played an incredibly controlled game, and it stifled Japan kind of full stop. I think that there is, what is the saved shot that Mina Tanaka has in the 34th minute? She gets like a 0.1 XG chance. I think it's the only save Alyssa Nair made all game. That was a better chance than what Trinity Rodman finished. Not a great chance, but a better chance. And if that goes in, we're talking about a different game. But we're also talking about like a 0.1 XG chance.
That's exactly right. 35th minute. Point 1 is exactly the value.
And that was it. I mean, like, that was the chance that Japan really needed to finish in this game. It was the best look that they had at goal, the cleanest look that they had at goal all game. They ended the game with 0.04 non-penalty XG per shot. Like,
about that, yeah.
Ridiculous. That's Defensively, you will
Mm-hmm.
take that every day and twice on Sunday from the U.S. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is what you are hoping to do. I thought this game, in addition to Naomi Girma just sort of being Naomi Girma, I thought this was a really tidy game from Emily Sonnet. I thought this was a really tidy
Yeah.
game from Emily Fox. This is one of my favorite Emily Fox performances, full stop, that I've seen her have for the U.S. because it was so self-contained. It was great.
I agree.
And Fox is playing in possession this weird hybrid third center back role more than she's playing this right back role.
Yeah, a third center back that is allowed to get wide.
Yeah. And if you look at the sort of that is making a lot of choices about when to stay and when to go. And I think when to stay and when to go was one of the primary questions we had about Emily Fox entering last year's World Cup and how she was going to determine to do that. In this Emma Hayes system, I don't think there was a moment yesterday where she made the wrong choice about when to stay and when to go. That meant largely staying, but it covered for Corbin Albert, who I thought was basically dead weight in the middle of the field with pass. I mean, just look, did Corbin Albert make obvious errors in the game? Nothing critical, but also she offered you absolutely nothing moving forward.
Yeah.
Throughout.
If you looked at her line breaking pass data, 12 for 15 on breaking lines, 80%. Quite good.
Yeah.
If you drill down, you will find that a lot of those line breaking attempts are trying to break the first unit that Japan offers you. So on a couple of times when they're playing with three lines, what that means is she's playing a pass that gets in between the forwards and the midfielders.
Mm-hmm.
That's not necessarily, in fact, it's almost never a really high value line breaking attempt.
Also, Japan actively was giving her that.
Mm-hmm.
And she so rarely opted for it. Japan was
Yeah.
not interested in winning the ball particularly high up the pitch or offering, other than in these sort of little bursts, sustained pressure, which is why Girma ended up with absurd passing numbers. Japan was happy to give you that.
Yeah, and look at the field control graphic. Like, there is a very stark, clear line where the U.S.'s attacking third begins, where the U.S.'s majority of ball control stops, and Japan's majority of ball control starts right at the start of the attacking third for the U.S. You know?
Yeah,
kind of says it all.
Yeah, if you want to talk about sort of where the Japanese drew the line, you just look at the crossing data.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. attempted 9 crosses, not a ton, almost all of them from the right.
Yep.
And completed 1 cross.
Yep.
The Japanese, the pass maps indicate it. There is just a lot of white in, and very little that is completed. There is a halo that surrounds the 18-yard box that the Japanese did not allow the U.S. to pass through. And so we ended up in this attritional game. I actually wanted to circle back to a point that Jeff's making that also was brought up about sort of World Cups. The men's World Cup for a long time has played, in the summers after long competitive seasons. And for a long time, the criticism has been that the pace of play and that the quality of play always is diminished by most players being at the absolute end of an already grueling season. We will begin to see that more often with women's international tournaments as women begin playing the same number of games. I think that we're in for this. I suspect that in the future, we will be seeing World Cups that are leggy. We'll see Olympics that are leggier as more people play 10, 11 months of the year professionally with their club sides.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look and see if maybe that's reflected in the data from the 2022 Euros, because that is a tournament that started basically 3 weeks after the European season ended. The World Cup last year got a little bit of a reprieve because being played in Australia and New Zealand, they kicked it toward the later part of the summer, to the end of July. So European players had a couple of months off from competitive action. So
also was being played in winter. So generally speaking, more agreeable weather to play a a sport where you're doing distance running.
That's right. And the U.S., though they never reached, 105-degree heat index levels of heat and unpleasantness and during the group stage, they were playing games where the temperature was getting into like the low to mid 80s, even at night when they had like a 9 p.m. local time kickoff.
Mhm.
And that's tough, especially if it's humid. So when you add that into having only 2 days rest between games, how could it not be so that we saw a match like we did last night? That
Yeah.
being said, I mean, now that we've caveated all of it, there were a couple of things that Emma Hayes did do that I don't know if I quite anticipated, and namely like the ways in which she used the central midfielders, where especially in the first half, for long stretches of the game, Corbin Albert was left as a single pivot.
Very much so.
And Haran was given this free double 10 role to move where basically Rose Lavelle wasn't, to try and find seams. And there have been times where that has not always felt like it was smart, but I think in a game like this, it's not the worst idea in the world because you're just desperate to find any possible pocket of space to create a triangle by having a spare player, you know? And with Rodman dropping so deep, that often gave you sometimes a midfield 4 if Lavelle wasn't pushed up, or it was a midfield 3 to try and just get some sort of numerical advantage on what Fukunagano and Yui Hasegawa were offering in the middle of the park. So I didn't hate it, but you just wondered if like there was just one extra bit of passing precision from the Japanese into Albert's area would she have been able to cope, because leaving her as a single pivot was like felt awfully risky.
And to Corbin Albert's credit, she was so risk averse that when in possession, she was playing passes to keep herself in position should the ball have been turned over.
Yeah.
Corbin Albert completed 21 passes to Emily Sonnet, 14 passes to Naomi Girma, 15 passes to Emily Fox. She completed no more than 7 passes to any other player on the field, and that 7 passes was to Crystal Dunn. Corbin Albert was offering you nothing moving forward and not getting herself out of position because she was, I wonder how fearful she was of being caught out of her position in her single pivot. It was not what you would get from Sam Coffey. It was not what you needed to get. And it had this knock-on effect that left Lavelle and Haran without a third partner in that middle. And I think started isolating the United States' ability to build through the middle of the field. And so you end up with Haran also doing a lot of back passing as she seeks out space to receive the ball. And it ends up with Lavelle feeling, for long stretches of the game, pretty detached from what was going on. And that, in turn, knocked on to there being a sort of a disjointed quality in the attack that the United States was executing.
Yeah, I think that might be another part of why Hayes played so conservatively, that without Coffey there is just lower quality in terms of trying to break lines into dangerous areas and cover more defensive ground. So interestingly, I'm looking at Sam Coffey's off-ball defensive data from the FIFA reports in the game against Germany, and adjust these a little bit for possession. But basically, she pressured the ball carrier or pushed on to try and pressure somebody off the ball 20 times against Germany. And if you adjust that for possession, maybe just think about that close to like 25 times, because they had 56% of the ball against Germany. Against Japan, they had 71% of the ball. And I will say, Albert ended up pressuring or pushing on 20 times when the U.S. had 71% of the ball. So her off-ball defensive movement was fairly savvy when there were opportunities to open up. So I'll give her a little bit of credit there, but it's the two-way elements of Coffey's game that makes her really, really significant. So as you say, like with always with the mind of control, she most likely only pressured the ball when it was absolutely necessary, and then could not then release the attack the other direction, except to just recycle among the back line. And again, that's probably tactical instruction, but it's also the limitations of Albert's skill set, because we have seen that passing profile over and over again all tournament.
It's also not like the U.S. has a quick fix for Sam Coffey here.
Right.
Corbin Albert is next up, but this isn't something that Emily Sonnet would have probably played much differently had she been sitting in the 6. This is not something with what we've seen of Hal Hirschfeld so far, we could have anticipated Hal Hirschfeld being a lot more progressive. Sam Coffey is, and why we're such big fans, is a really special player. There are not a lot of players who can play in a single pivot for an elite team and offer you what she offers you in creation while also being defensively resolute.
Yeah.
It's just there are not many Sam Coffeys in world football, and they are special players, and it is very rare that any team could absorb the loss of a Sam Coffey and not feel the effects the way the U.S.
And
felt.
listen, I cited Albert's line-breaking data about her breaking just the first unit in the Japanese defense. It's not as if the rest of the U.S. back line and central midfield were doing anything differently. I mean, Emily Fox tried to break lines 35 times. 29 of those attempts were coming against the Japanese's first unit. Naomi Girma, 27 attempts overall, 20 of them were against either from forward to midfield or from midfield to defense if Japan was only playing with 2 units. So, and same story with Sonnet. I mean, 28 line-breaking attempts overall, 26 of them against the first unit. So it is, again, a testament to Hayes' game plan and Japan's defensive resoluteness that the game ended up being so boring a lot of the time.
It was that Simpsons episode where they're like, and he passes and passes back and he passes. I mean, this was Girma and Sonnet completed 82 passes between the two.
It's a lot for center backs.
Yeah, it's a lot for anyone.
Yeah. Part of the FIFA data is also breaking up the percentages of which phase of play your game comprised that day, so both in possession and out of possession. 55% of the U.S.'s possession play was in the category that FIFA calls unopposed build-up play. And I think that's
a great description.
Fucking obvious, And
again, this is where...
Oh, and by the way, Japan's out of possession play phase, basically 1/3 was mid-block, 1/3 was low block, which again I think was passes the eye test.
This was also the U.S. executing a game plan that was in response to what the Japanese game plan looked like. Yeah. This was Emma Hayes' control ball. Mm-hmm. And it's the suffer v struggle. And that was the direction this game always felt like it was going. I mean, the best chance of the game for the U.S. is a single pressure from Sophia Smith, where she forces a mistake and gets in on goal. There is 0 passes in that sequence from the U.S.
Yeah.
It was a moment of individual excellence that nearly resulted in a goal. And frankly, Smith was a little leggy at that time, and the Japanese defended reasonably well considering the circumstances of that turnover.
And that chance happens in the first half of extra time, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, everyone is just totally wiped, and Smith probably doesn't even win the ball unless the Japanese are starting to flag just enough.
Yeah, and you saw the Japanese flagging, as was acknowledged by their active substitutions, which is probably the next thing we should talk about. Mm-hmm. The deployment of subs. I don't want to get too much into the discourse about it, other than to say the Japanese were doing hard running on those legs. That kind of defensive shuttle running and shifting to play the and I compared it to an accordion on the YouTube, to just play that compression, to compress that space so actively and then expand and compress. That is so hard, both mentally and physically,
Yeah.
that the Japanese just found themselves sort of ground into nothing.
It's why if you're not able to snatch a goal to get a lead and maybe get yourself a little bit more comfortable vis-a-vis the game state, that's why you keep saying that Japan has a high floor and low ceiling, because if this is plan A against top sides and they cannot score on the counter, if their opposition isn't giving them that the other way, then they're going to burn out,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and especially given the context of the tournament. And that's exactly what happened.
Are the U.S. a little bit lucky that this didn't go to penalties? Yeah, I think they are.
Big time.
Did they have a game plan that gave them the opportunity ever so slightly more to win the game during regulation? Yeah, I think they did.
But you know, it's not for lack of trying on Futoshi Ikeda's part. Like, he brought in Maika Hamano, he brought in Riko Ueki, he brought in Hinata Miyazawa. He brought attacking weapons onto the field in the second half. But it just wasn't enough because the US's defensive strategies did not give them the chance to move the ball quickly upfield in transition.
Yeah, let's move on and talk about the problem of depth that we're beginning to see in terms of trust by Emma Hayes. I think we saw 3 subs yesterday on what was a very difficult game.
Important to remember that she only had 5 available outfield players to begin with because of Sam Coffey's suspension. So it's a short bench.
Yeah, it is a short bench. That said, we saw no regulation subs. We saw Lynn Williams, Williams on for Swanson, who looked gassed.
Totally gassed.
Who put in a shift and looked gassed.
Yep. Then Neiswanger comes on at the beginning of the second half of extra time for Lavelle.
Yeah, for Lavelle, correct. And then we get just a wasting clock sub.
Oh, and also Emily Fox banged her knee up against a Japanese player and potentially
That's
was injured.
Right.
So
we see a wounded Emily Fox taken off in the 120th minute for Casey Kruger.
Yeah,
and that was it. There was no Jaden Shaw who was available. To try to break down this game. I thought that this was potentially a little reckless, in terms of just like, if you're the U.S., thank God Germany and Canada went to penalties, because at least you're facing somebody who is just as exhausted as you are.
And you played the early games, so you get a little bit extra rest time too.
Yeah, theoretically, I don't know how much those handful of hours make a difference, but hey, you'll take any marginal edge you can get.
Yeah. I think that again, Hayes is just so hell bent on having the team work together as a unit and build those levels of communication. But I think when you get to maybe the 70th or the 75th minute and plan A isn't working, plan B isn't working, plan C isn't working, and your players are wiped the fuck out, then maybe that's the time to bring in reinforcements. Because it's not as if like whatever tactical plan you have is going to continue to develop and cohere by that stage of the game. You know, ASA, I can't remember who said this, but in one article once said, and actually I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree, that the most significant sort of like tactical periods of a match are the first 30 minutes of the first half and the first 15 minutes of the second half.
Yeah, I buy that.
So by minute 60, minute 65, minute 70, when all your players are really legging it and nothing is breaching the multiple steel curtains of Japan's defensive plan, maybe Lynn Williams brings a little bit of chaos into that environment. Maybe Jenna Neiswanger does too. Maybe Jaden Shaw for 5 minutes just to get her warmed up. Although we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe she wasn't ready for a lot of time if it could be avoided. But regardless, yeah, I wonder if maybe in the second half it would have been time to bring people on.
Yeah, I think the difference that we maybe have to acknowledge and accept here is that Emma Hayes did not see this as plan A, plan B, and plan C not working.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's where the line is for me. Because I think to you and I, and we were discussing it on the live, this was to us plan A, B, and C not working.
Yeah.
I think for Hayes, this, and I think her career bears this out a little bit. This is steady as she goes, continue forward, push harder. It's a very almost English take on how we approach. It is this. It's this, if we keep banging this square peg into this round hole, eventually this hole will become a square.
Yeah.
And I think she looked at what the Japanese weren't creating, what the US wasn't giving up, and thought this is acceptable because we are winning this arm wrestling match, just holding them a little bit down, a little bit over.
Yeah.
And eventually we'll break them.
Well,
and frankly, she was proved right.
But what?
Whether it was statistically repeatable or not, yeah. At what cost?
Yeah, because Germany awaits on Tuesday in the semifinal a team that's already gotten one look at the U.S. and there are a lot more minutes in the U.S. players' legs, even though there are also a lot more minutes in the German players' legs. So, what does Horst Hrubesch and his players have in mind to attack this? Because now we really are at that phase where you want your best 11 out on the field every time.
Yeah,
and those players are drained. Counterpoint: Sam Coffey will be fresh as a daisy.
My deep fear is that Emma Hayes loved Corbin Albert's performance and throws her back out there.
I don't believe that's going to happen.
I don't either, but it is a let's just say there will be a sigh of relief when I see Sam Coffey's name in the starting 11.
Yep.
And there will be dread until I see it.
Yep. 7:30 a.m. Pacific on Tuesday. Set your clock. That's when the roster will drop.
Oh, baby. Yeah, I think that this is a fine, gritty, quality performance against a high quality opponent in a knockout game that I care not to watch again. But you take it.
Mm-hmm.
This is Emma Hayes gave the U.S. a better chance to win this game in regulation. They won it, and it worked out.
Yeah.
At what cost, we will find out in later games. But as we'll get to in our bonus episode, nobody had a good game yesterday who moved on.
Yeah. You want to talk about you want to talk about Germany a little bit and preview the semifinal here, because Germany and Canada played a pretty wretched game as well.
The answer here is no. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about that game ever again.
Yeah. I mean, bizarre, a totally bizarre performance. I mean, it began as we assumed Canada would probably begin, with just the grinder lineup, and no Julia Grosso, no interest in creating any type of ball progression. Jordan Huitema played a lot of the game as a left winger. Nobody seemed to want to play the game as a right winger because Ashley Lawrence was dragged so far inside. They did not create not only did they not create a single quality chance, I don't believe they took a shot with an XG value above 0.04 in the first half, and they only got 2 shots off anyway. But then all of a sudden in the second half, and by the way, Germany wasn't offering much either. Nushkin was back up top. Pop was back in the middle, but they kept their wingers incredibly narrow, I think because they wanted to try and get numerical advantages against those center backs, because they knew just how difficult it was to try and play against Rose, Buchanan, and Gilles, which is not a bad idea, but a lot of width ended up getting sacrificed. But then in the second half, it all flipped, and Canada brought on, I believe it was 4 forwards in like the 60th or the 65th minute as substitutes. Like all of us.
Canada brought on Janine Becky at the half for Jessie Fleming, which is, talk about a shoot yourself in the foot kind of substitution, where it's like, yes, do bring on Janine Becky. Who are you bringing her on for? No, don't take off Jessie Fleming.
Not like
don't
this.
do that.
Not like this.
Not like this. Yeah, it's that. And then we have a triple substitution.
I mean, to be fair, Fleming was hurt. She probably wasn't going to be able to going on in the game.
But it's like, yes, that's fair. But it was a sub that was made at the half as opposed to one that felt so urgent that it needed to be dealt with. Look, if if it looked like Fleming really couldn't go on, fine. But I will forever be frustrated when I see those kinds of substitutions in a game where you're offering nothing. That said, we get Viens, we get Lacasse, and we get Lyon.
Yeah. And a couple of those are
in the
like for like
57th.
because Prince and Heidema get taken off, but Gabby Carl gets taken
Correct.
off for Lacasse. And so that is a very forward-thinking.
That's a truly attacking.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden you've got 4 dedicated attackers on the field, which I can't even remember the last time Canada played with that kind of approach. And also getting Ashley Lawrence forward a ton. And they generated some good chances in the second half and in extra time. I mean, Adriana Leon's got a look in the 71st minute. Viens has a look like a few minutes later. Vanessa Gilles had a header in the 61st that wasn't too bad of a chance. Leon almost won it in the 87th. Like, they were really trying to win the game.
Yeah. Leon creates a ton of XG, including and ends up with a right-footed chance in the 116th minute, right in the box. This was a game where both teams ended up with opportunities to win this game, high quality chances to win this game, and could not. And for two teams that actually like control a fair amount, were really swinging at each other.
Yeah.
Toward the end of it.
Yeah.
And all the same, it is not a good watch. But it is not the same game as what the United States and Japan were playing.
No.
Despite the scoreline similarity.
Yeah, and relatively close on XG.
we-
It's like a 2.2 to 1.9 split.
Yeah. Which is great. Almost all of that generated from minute 45 on. So I think that we just end up in a situation where Canada, who at this point have to be described as snake bit of late on penalties. I mean, they scored none of 3 in the Gold Cup.
Yeah.
Against the United States. And Katrin Berger does her best goalkeeper in the world on a heater thing.
Yep. Hands behind her back right up until the moment
Yeah.
you actually take the shot is like a very intimidating thing to do.
Yeah, she cuts a terrifying figure in net.
And
the question people often have is
it took a nice penalty, like just forced Sheridan to guess wrong.
Yeah, it's she's I mean, you love seeing a goalkeeper close the game out to win it.
And was eating it up. I mean, they were taking the penalties on the side of the German fans. So when she made a big stop, she was doing Russell Crowe and Gladiator type things. And then when she scored her pen, it was the same deal. Like, I mean, who's having a better year than on Katrin Berger, for real? Like,
no, it's a great question.
First time she's ever been the number 1 for Germany at a major tournament. You know, she resurrected her career at club level with Gotham. It's just been a lovely thing to see.
I do wonder if we're going to start seeing, this feels like a minor shift where European players coming to the NWSL are having their performances assessed and they are getting into their European sides on the back of really good performances.
I hope so.
That is what Ann-Katrin Berger is doing. And yeah, I think it's a good sign, generally speaking, for the NWSL.
So what?
I by the way, only Barbara Banda, I think, is having potentially, and Temwa Chewinga are having better quote-unquote years.
Yeah, certainly in the context of the NWSL. So what do we think about this performance that Germany offered up, and can it teach us anything about how they might deal with the U.S. in the rematch? Hard for me to imagine that.
I'm like, kind of no.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that Brandon Buell will be pulled this tightly inside in possession when they are not going to have to worry about dealing with 3 center backs.
Yeah.
And will want to try and activate their width, but at the same time, it really, really failed against the U.S. Barring some moments of Lindsey Horan poor defending on the inside channels. Do they think that strategy can just be turned up to 11 and actually find the net this time?
My feeling with and this is really about setting expectations for American fans, what I'm about to say. what we saw in the group stage between Germany and the US was actually a pretty tight game.
Yeah.
That was very game statey, defined by an early goal. I think tactically, I expect both teams to come out as they did, which is to say the Germans quite organized, looking for opportunities to create pressure, and the United States using their trident, their multi-pronged attack to wreak absolute havoc. I am sure Hegering and Heinrich are not getting great sleep thinking about what Sophia Smith did to them, and are probably having extended conversations about how to deal with her physically.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect both teams would have been relatively satisfied with the game plans as executed in that game, despite the fact that Germany, on the scoreline, took a beating.
I think where I might push back is just that I'm not totally sure Germany looked that organized, even accounting for the
Okay.
game state, you know?
Yeah, fair enough.
Because, we're going to see Feli Rauch in this game instead of Sarah Linda, obviously. So the fullbacks are going to probably be a little bit nervous about how far up they adventure, and they were pretty conservative against Canada. It's a very narrow game. But how do you prevent, and also, the Minga Pop central midfield duo is exploitable because it does not have a lot of pace. Neither do the center backs either, frankly. And with enough interchange, it just never felt like Germany's defensive unit could get set and be aggressive in stopping penetration.
Fair.
Does that mean it will be a failure or a success on Tuesday? I cannot say either way, but I've just not been impressed with the way that Germany has defended throughout the tournament, even in games like against Australia where they dominated.
I was not super high on Germany going into this tournament. Of course, it is a very talented team. It's a German team. They always are going to come and bring something to play. I think arrested, whether forced or not, Sam Coffey, should she get the start, and I agree with you. I think she will. Is a yet bigger problem for Germany than it was the first time around. Granted, Coffey did not have a particularly good game. I think this game, from the U.S. point of view, Lindsey Horan has to be rewatching the tape against Germany and acknowledging the stray running that she was doing. And the Germans, if they're looking for a place to key on, it should be about trying to drag Lindsey Horan out of position as much as possible, and then exploiting the spaces between her and isolating Sam Coffey. That, to me, is where the primary battle exists. I don't know how much the Germans can dictate that. I continue to be baffled by their usage of Nushkin and Pop.
And that's clearly not changing.
See no reason. That's not changing. I see no, which I think just, it's Germany playing with one hand behind its back at that point. But of course, we're one deadly, dangerous cross away from a very, very tough game for the U.S. to come back in.
If Fox is too injured to play, and if Horan is not defensively disciplined, and if Buell and Brand are set up wide like we expect, that again, those inside left and inside right channels, particularly the Clara Buell to Lea Schuler relationship, could be a big fucking problem.
It occurs to me that given that Rose Lavelle went 105 and was not super effective, it wouldn't be, I don't think this is going to happen, but it wouldn't it would break my brain emotionally. It would not break my brain in terms of understanding what Emma Hayes does if we saw Corbin Albert start in the 8 and Lavelle come off the bench and Horan be sent to the 10.
Yeah.
Just given the minutes that have been logged.
Well, I'll just say the player that I worry about more is Rodman. Even though Rodman is clearly, quote, built different and has a motor and an engine and a level of endurance that very few players have, she she made 3 clearances in the U.S. box against Japan. She's a forward. Like, that's how much defensive work rate she is putting in, not to mention scoring the game-winning goal and continually attempting to stretch defenses with her dribbling and her cutbacks. So what does she have left? Because I don't know if Rodman at any point in her career has ever been faced with this kind of endurance test given the cadence of the Olympic tournament. And that's really worrying because Hayes is not going to want to bench her.
No, and we've yet to see Hayes really trust alternatives.
And that's Buell, that's Felirak, and that's Clara Buell's side. Will be the side that Rodman will be helping to defend.
I again shade this to the U.S. They've been so good at denying opponents opportunities to score. Yeah. It's you just return to it, and Germany has not looked as defensively resolute, but the Germans have very dangerous weapons, and again, are just one good cross away at all times, which is why they hold their place in world football right now, and why they are rightfully intimidating. So you want to give me a little prediction?
I'm going to say 2-1 to the U.S. in regulation time, and I'm only saying in regulation time because I want it to be true. I don't know if it's actually going to be true.
I solidly agree that as I feel when I go to the movies, 90 minutes, great runtime. Most movies don't justify being 2 hours. Same is true with football matches. Love a 90-minute runtime. Love a tight 90. I'm hoping for a tight 90. I think this one's going maybe 1-0 to the U.S. I expect both of these teams to be yet tighter than they played before. Obviously, if we get an early goal, throw that out. I don't think if the U.S. scores in the 11th minute, as they did again, we will see a 1-0 hold-on game, just because I think Germany is too good going forward and the U.S. is too dangerous on the counter.
Right.
But I think maybe 1-0. I buy 2-1. I agree. I hope regulation.
Yeah. Please, for the love of God.
Please.
And not just for us, but also for the players. Like, the players need a break.
Yeah, we'll talk about the other side of the bracket on the bonus episode. But very long matches, because I suspect both of us don't think that the other semifinal will go the distance. It will be important for the U.S. if they can get through this to not be leggier than likely winners.
Yeah.
Spain.
Yep. And well, we'll talk about it in the bonus episode. You'll hear about why we think Spain are still probably the tournament favorites. But in the meantime, thanks for listening. If you're enjoying our Olympics coverage, you can get more of it by signing up for our Patreon. For only $6 a month, you'll get all of our bonus content, including 4 bonus episodes every month. For the tournament, we are doing bonus episodes for non-U.S. opponents, and we have been really enjoying our live YouTube watch-alongs. We've got 2 in the can, and we're probably planning another one for the medal round as well. That's available only to our paid members. And you also get access to our Discord server, which is full of the most fun soccer fans you could possibly ask for. I'm enjoying it more and more and more, the more people we add and the more conversations we get into. So all of that could be yours for only $6 a month. Just click on the link to our Patreon in the show notes.
We are going to be closing this entry period at the end of the Olympics as well.
That's right. Yes. If you can sign up by Saturday, your $6 a month price will be locked in forever, even as we add new tiers with new content at higher prices. You will get access to those tiers at no extra cost to you. So if you want to become one of our founding deep lying playmakers and never pay more than $6 a month, do so by Saturday.
Until then, until Tuesday, I hope everybody ices and elevates, because that was a stressful and straining. If you did the whole Bellatar 8 hours plus of football yesterday, you are a sicko. Yeah. I had to take a nap and watch games. So kudos to those of you, and I know Evan is this sicko, but like kudos to those of you who lived that Mitchell and Webb sketch. There's always football that seemingly means something to someone being played at all times.
U.S.-Japan certainly felt like characters in Satan Tango, like walking through a mud pit.
Yeah. Yeah, to say nothing of Canada, Germany.
Yes.
To say yeah. Oh
Ice,
man, insufferable. Anyway,
ice, compress, elevate, get your sleep,
Yeah.
drink your electrolytes, and we're going to come back
Yeah.
even stronger on Tuesday, and you'll hear us again on Wednesday to recap the semifinals.
All right. Till then.
Bye.
Bye.